As Christian counselors, we have a greater responsibility than our secular colleagues to be above reproach in the way we conduct ourselves and the way that we carry out our calling and profession. There are numerous practices, precautions, and prayerful attitudes that can help each of us across a lifetime of counseling to stay on track. There are 4 such practices on which we're going to focus on for the next few moments. I agree with McMinn when he states that a careful, informed consent policy and professional disclosure is an earmark of Christian counseling. Second, we need clear ethical standards of how we are going to practice day to day. This provides us with a clear sense of how to conduct ourselves in a way that is going to anticipate and avoid obvious problems and create the most therapeutic environment for our clients. You can find an excellent source of ethical standards through the American Association of Christian Counselors. Third, we need to have a clear confidentiality policy and practice that states how we're going to honor the confidentiality of our clients. And fourth, counselors need to have practices of self-care and spiritual formation in place to keep us at our best and growing in the Lord for the long term so we do not burn out early. In case you have never prepared an informed consent before, there are several elements that are very important to include in this type of document. I strongly encourage you to spend some time as you are preparing to enter counseling to have all these statements in place before you see your first client. Or if you are already working in some capacity in counseling and you have not done so yet, I would urge you to develop your professional disclosure and informed consent documents as soon as possible. Having this kind of document in place, where you have clients sign it after they have read it, can save you many headaches in the future. Here is a list of what this document should include: an accurate and clear description of your training and qualifications and license if you have it, what the ground rules are on how you will see clients, such as the times and the days of week that you will see people, and the number of sessions that you set as a maximum or minimum. You should also describe the kinds and to what depth of problems you will counsel. It is very important to not exceed your training and ability in counseling. You want to make sure that you are not counseling someone in an area that you have not been trained in, which would be unethical. You also will want to articulate your referral policy. As mentioned earlier in a previous lecture, you are not obligated to meet with every client that comes to you for help, especially if it is in an area where you do not have training or experience. As a Christian, it is important to let your clients know that, and to let them know the way this impacts your approach to counseling, and the techniques that you may use. Lastly, you need to include a statement of your expectations of clients in terms of their attendance, and to be on time, their use of session time, their diligence to participate, that you expect them to do any homework given, and certainly the fees that they might be paying. It is essential as a counselor to always be thinking ahead about your ethical standards of practice. First, it is important that you consider the worst possible case scenarios, not to be negative, but to be aware. As Jesus warned us, be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves. We need to have some hedges against inappropriate behavior. For instance, a counselor should never invite someone for counseling in their home late at night. While I'm sure this sounds obvious, as you enter the profession, you will be amazed that this behavior happens quite frequently. Anticipate situations that might promote inappropriate behavior or accusations of impropriety. Next, think through what your standards might be in terms of ensuring your objectivity in handling secrets in family counseling. To do family counseling well is a great act of ministry to hurting families. But it is important for you not to become part of the problem. You want to be able to state clearly ahead of time how you're going to handle confidentiality and how you're going to distinguish between privacy and secrets, and then follow through on those policies. Another standard you need in place is a clear rationale for handling conflicts of moral values. When you are faced with an irreconcilable difference with a client, it is important for you to refer that client to another counselor. One example of this might be having a client who is engaged in marital infidelity and who is seeking your approval for their behavior. At some point, you may have to refer this client if this becomes a complete non-negotiable moral conflict for you. It is also important to be sensitive to your blind spots. All of us have prejudices and biases. It is part of being human. Part of your self-awareness is to know what yours are and to look for warning signs that you are behaving in a biased way. A key practice here would be to make some kind of provision for accountability, such as professional supervision. All professional counselors should be in some kind of accountability relationship. And lastly, every counselor should have a rationale for how and when to employ spiritual interventions. We have talked before about the use of scripture, prayer, confession in the counseling process, and about the spiritual dynamics of the therapeutic relationship. So it's important for you to have a sense of how you are going to use these interventions at the proper time. Let's take a few moments and look at how an ethical counselor makes decisions. One professional ethical standard is doing no harm. This is always our first requirement as a professional and as Christian counselors, to do no harm to our clients. Secondly, to know who the client is, especially when you're working with couples or families. It is sometimes an important question to know who is the client and in whose interest are you going to place as a top priority. The counselor also needs to consider what is in the client's best interest, not necessarily what does the client want, but what does the client need? Next, are there any inherent risks or dangers of which you need to be aware? Does this person present a danger to themselves or others? Are there any factors in this person's family or relationships that are a risk or danger of which you need to be aware? Then, is the work that you are doing and the way you are making decisions in line with Christian morals and values? As much as we want to help people, we aren't helpful to them if we violate our own core values to do so. And this also includes our professional standards and codes of ethics. It is never justified for a counselor to violate the professional standards and ethics of the practice of counseling. Christian psychologist Larry Crabb has encouraged counselors to ask ourselves every time we meet with a client several questions. Not, how is this client doing? But how am I feeling? How am I reacting to this person? These become important depth questions for understanding something about our motives, reactions, about our own enmeshment with the client. It also helps keep us out of potential problems, such as not dealing with sexual attraction to a client in an ethical way. It is a simple fact. If we cannot hold confidences, then we cannot practice counseling. People cannot trust those who will not keep their secrets. And yet, situations do arise where it is clear how to handle certain secrets that have been shared with us. For instance, if a client shares that they have been sexually abusing their child, we are required by law in all 50 states to contact the police and report it to Child Protective Services immediately. In many states, if a client tells you they are planning to murder their spouse, you are ethically required to let that spouse know they may be in danger. So, there are several situations in which you must break confidences. As part of their informed consent, it is important to let your potential clients know, before they start counseling, what those circumstances are and where their confidences might be broken. As a part of the therapeutic contract, we also need to detail the way in which confidentiality is going to be handled when it is not one of the areas where it must be broken. This is especially important when working with couples or families, when trust issues may be a great part of the conflict they're having. For instance, you may be working individually as well as together with a couple and hear personal matters. Do you share them with the other spouse or not? What are you going to do with this information? Counselors need to share with the client how those matters are going to be handled before you start the process. To help explore the difference between secret keeping and privacy, we need to ask ourselves questions. Does the other member of the couple need to know? If I keep this information private, am I engaging in collusion with this person and keeping their secret from their spouse? Is secrecy already a problem in this relationship? Am I promoting behavior that will only worsen the relationship in the long run? These kind of therapeutic questions help us anticipate discussing confidentiality in the beginning of the counseling relationship when you're doing couple and family counseling. Carpel uses the term accountability with discretion as his way of talking about the confidential relationship of a counselor with clients in a family or couple situation. He recommends that the counselor negotiate with the couples ahead of time as to what sort of discretion they may want to give the counselor in guiding them to divulge information that has been kept from the other, and in doing what is in best interest of the couple. Lastly, we must watch out for triangulation and collusion traps, because these are common when couples and families try to make the counselor take sides. This is done to draw the counselor into the conflict and to make you part of the problem, or to have you engage in collusion of secret keeping. George Oschlager is a licensed social worker and an attorney who has studied and written on the most common legal and ethical pitfalls in Christian counseling. The first pitfall is counseling beyond your competency. You must recognize the limits of your training and expertise and qualifications, or giving advice against medical treatment. Our colleagues in the medical field are indeed that, our colleagues. We are never empowered as professional, pastoral, or lay counselors to contradict the advice of a medical doctor. Sometimes counselors get into trouble because they fail to recognize danger or violence. So when some terrible tragedy happens, the counselor is blamed because they were professionally negligent. Some counselors with a certain point of view about spiritual warfare and spiritual dynamics try to diagnose psychotic clients by mislabeling them as demon-possessed, or misrepresenting your credentials as simply lying about yourself. And that can get you into serious ethical and maybe legal problems. The last few are very easy to recognize as wrong. Never recommend for or against divorce. Do not violate confidentiality except in the prescribed situations, and never make the professional mistake of labeling all problems as strictly spiritual. Let's consider how to be an effective counselor and enjoy a long and fulfilling practice, which falls under the self-care of a counselor, an intrapersonal information category. Here are several ways that you can use to take care of yourself, because you should never underestimate what a challenging profession you are entering in by becoming a counselor. To see hurting people day in and day out can wear you down. It is important to anticipate that you need refreshment, that you need a support system, and that you need some time for self-care. It is a measure of wisdom when we who are engaged in Christian counseling receive our own counseling from time to time, sometimes in the form of accountability partners and professional supervision, and sometimes in the form of actual therapy. It is also important that we be intentional about our individual and family prayer life and spiritual formation. It is a good idea to look for a support group for counselors in your area. I would urge you to find a personal mentor, someone who is a Christian counselor, a pastor or elder who has been counseling for a long time and who can be an encouraging figure for you. You must also continue your training. None of us will ever reach the point where we know it all or we've had enough training. There is always some new insight, new research, and new writings that can be helpful and renewing to us and to our clients. We must remain aware of the compassion fatigue and burnout that comes from the wear and tear that we experience when dealing with hurting people on a daily basis. It is important to be intentional about your wellness practices, to be concerned about your daily rest, about exercise, about proper nutrition, about having some forms of recreation, and being diligent in keeping a reasonable work schedule.